Now, more from the Council of the Americas conference at the State Department. First, you'll hear from the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. He'll talk about economic stability in the Americas. Later, you'll hear from the Mexican Secretary of Finance and the Argentine Economic Minister. It's about an hour and 40 minutes.
If I could ask everyone to come in and please take their seats, because we'd like to move ahead with a very interesting part of our discussions today, where we will start off with Horst Köhler to talk to us about the International Monetary Fund's views on Latin America. We'll then be hearing from Paco Gil Diaz, Secretary of Finance of Mexico, and then Domingo Cavallo, Minister of Economy of Argentina. I'm delighted to introduce Horst Köhler, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. I am pleased that he was able to take the time from a busy schedule to be with us here today and to talk to us about promotion of stability and prosperity in the Americas. Horst was unanimously elected to serve as Managing Director by the Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund on March 23, 2000. And assumed office a little over a year ago. Prior to assuming his current position, Horst was president of the EBRD, which is the Development Bank for Eastern Central Europe. He was also president of the German Savings Association and Deputy Minister of Finance of Germany, where he was responsible for international financial and monetary relations. He represented Germany at the negotiations leading to the famous Maastricht Treaty on European Economic and Monetary Union. Horst has stepped in vigorously into his new job. He has been instrumental in supporting economic reform programs for the governments of Ecuador, Turkey, and Argentina, among others, during his period as Managing Director. And as I said, we'll be hearing specifically on the Argentine program from Domingo Cavallo shortly. Very importantly, Horst has made a major effort, and I emphasize this, a major effort to promote a closer relationship and dialogue with the private sector on all matters pertaining to both crisis prevention and crisis resolution. And this has gained him the respect of so many of us in the private sector. He's formed separate groups and committees of the private sector to work with the International Monetary Fund because he recognizes how important the private sector is to achieving financial stability in the world. Horst has graciously agreed to take some questions after his speech. Bill Price reminded our good friends in the press, and no matter how good their questions are, we really have asked them to hold them because we want to give an opportunity to all of you here in the private sector to ask questions. Thank you very much for being here, Horst, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Bill, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be here today because we have important goals in common. The Council of the Americas has a long tradition of encouraging dialogue and cooperation in this hemisphere. And it is the mission of the IMF to provide a permanent mechanism for international cooperation through which its truly universal membership works together to seize the opportunities and minimize the risks of today's integrated global economy. The IMF has a special relationship, if you want so, with Latin America and the Caribbean. The outcome of our involvement is not a story of unmixed success. But on balance, I assess the situation in Latin America and the Caribbean as being fundamentally better today than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And I do think this difference is due, not least, to the work of the IMF. Countries throughout the region have clearly embraced democracy, open markets, and macroeconomic stability. This has laid, in my view, the foundation for a good future. It is clear that Latin America and the Caribbean still face difficult challenges. In particular, too many people still live in poverty. Also, steps to strengthen governance and fight corruption have often lagged behind other reforms, undermining credibility and investor confidence. And because many countries are major borrowers in international capital markets, they are particularly vulnerable to volatility in these markets. A strategy to meet these challenges is to promote transparency, competitiveness, and sound democratic institutions. Because the people in this region, as in the rest of the world, strive for a better future, this will pay off in more investment, stronger economic growth, and better social development. So the strategy is to promote growth. And this will also pave the way for better access to capital markets. In this regard, efforts to strengthen the soundness of banking sectors have already put many Latin American economies in a better position to withstand external shocks, like, for instance, Argentina. On the whole, I think that 3 years after the Asian crisis, the international financial system has become more resilient. The United States has been an engine of growth for the region and for the world throughout the past decade. Some moderation in the pace of this expansion was clearly warranted. The IMF's best guess is that the slowdown in the US and global economies will be relatively short-lived. But we do not think that this will happen by itself. The international community must be proactive to ensure a good outcome. Discussions at last week's meeting of the IMF's International Monetary and Financial Committee, IMFC, showed more awareness about the interdependencies in the world economy. And from this, we expect that a better sense of shared responsibility will emerge. Our members recognized that the United States has shown strong economic leadership. The decisive moves by the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates have clearly demonstrated its determination to help prevent a further weakening of growth. And the emerging tax cut will also help to shore up consumer and investor confidence in this country. Japan has rightly adopted a new monetary framework to fight the risk of deflation. Even more encouraging is that the new Prime Minister has recognized the importance of accelerating reforms of the banking and corporate sector. We all hope and we urge him to act decisively. Fortunately, Europe, with a projected growth rate of 2.5% this year, is demonstrating a robust economic expansion. But stronger growth would not only be desirable, but also possible. The IMFC encouraged our European friends to adopt more ambitious structural reforms in order to raise potential growth in Europe to 3% and possibly more. And I'm sure that after last week's meetings, the European Central Bank is even more vigilant. The IMFC discussion also reflected a common understanding that forceful action to open markets and liberalize trade would be a benefit to all members, and that emerging market and developing countries should stay the course of structural reform and sound macroeconomic policies. On that basis, I see really no reason for pessimism about neither the near-term outlook nor even more so the long-term potential to improve living standards for people throughout the world. But we must do something for this positive outcome. Ladies and gentlemen, recent developments in international financial markets have clearly demonstrated that the IMF, for its part, needs to work even harder to put crisis prevention at the heart of all its activities. We are in this process. Last week's IMFC meeting confirmed our strategy and work program in this area. We are concentrating on macroeconomic and financial stability in member countries. We are reducing, so if you want so, the full range of possible structural reforms, but are concentrating, focusing on macroeconomic stability and growth as the major vehicle for the overcome problems. Secondly, we are promoting the stability and integrity of the international financial system. And thirdly, we are helping our members to develop sound financial sectors in order to protect them against vulnerability, mobilize financing for productive investment, and help them take advantage of the opportunities of global financial markets. Highest on our agenda for the coming months will be further work on early warning of potential crisis. For this, we need to combine quantitative indicators of vulnerability with judgment from the field and from the markets. This should involve cooperation with the private sector, and therefore I am so interested in this dialogue. To ensure the maximum beneficial impact, it will be important for this work to move forward with the full participation of the IMF's membership and with due care that our warnings about potential crisis do not become self-fulfilling prophecies. That is an important, caveat for all this. As part of this effort, the IMF also needs to do a better job of keeping up with developments in international capital markets. A new international capital markets department will help the IMF to deepen its understanding of and judgment on capital markets issues. Our informal but regular dialogue will refer to that with senior representatives of private financial institutions through the Capital Market Consultative Group will further strengthen our work on crisis prevention and resolution. The next meeting of the CMCG later this month in Hong Kong will focus on financial market vulnerabilities as well as specific prevention measures. We will review ways in which borrowing countries can develop strong investor relations programs. Here, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico are good examples. We will consider how the private sector can make better use of standards and codes as a way to promote stronger institutions, transparency, and improved risk assessment and decision-making in markets. And by the way, I will chair a meeting of this Capital Markets Consultative Group later in the year, I think in July, early July, in Latin America, in Brazil, because we want to reach out, we will reach out with this dialogue to the various regions of the world. And we will also discuss in the meetings with the private sector the role of the IMF's new contingent credit lines in crisis prevention. The philosophy behind the CCL is that good policies are still the best precaution that our members can take against crisis. This IMF lending facility is designed to reward countries that have established a strong track record of good policies in normal times and help them to resist contagion. And we are in the talk, and we do think that Mexico could be one of the first countries to make use of the CCL. No matter how much effort goes into crisis prevention, we must recognize that economic disruptions and crisis cannot be ruled out in an open and dynamic global economy. And therefore, the function as a crisis manager of the IMF still needs to be taken into account and to be sharpened. And our objective should not be to have more and bigger rescue packages, but to reduce the frequency and severity of crisis. But I also want to emphasize that the IMF's track record in crisis management has not been all that bad. In this region, for instance, the IMF played an important part in Chile's successful transition from economic and institutional disaster to democracy and sustained growth. More recently, the IMF's contribution was crucial to enable Mexico and Brazil to overcome their crisis and resume strong economic growth. Since then, Mexico has repaid all, and Brazil almost all, of their borrowings from the fund, and both are sticking to good policies. So we should also need to think about this message that these countries have paid back their loans. Sometimes I think it would help to promote even reform and structural change in some advanced economies if some of the committed reformers, for example, from Mexico or other countries in Latin America, were in charge of their economic policies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also confident that Argentina and Turkey will weather the storm. Both of them have taken strong ownership of measures to address their problems, and both have chosen a market-oriented approach. Minister Cavallo made clear to the IMFC just some days before that his approach is guided by fiscal discipline, respect for property rights, and creating a sound climate for competitiveness, investment, and growth. And this is the right strategy. In the same way, Minister Dervish for Turkey made clear that he is concentrating on building strong institutions and cleaning up the banking sector in Turkey, a root cause of the crisis there. And these approaches deserve strong support, and the fund stands ready to do this. And let me make clear that the IMF stands ready to help any other member country that is in a difficult situation, that wants to have the support of the fund and is willing to adopt the right policies and the right strategy. Private capital flows to developing countries peaked at about $250 billion a year before the Asian crisis, while total official flows, grants and loans, bilateral and multilateral, are less than 1/3 of that amount. Because private flows are an indispensable source of financing for development, another crucial function of the IMF's new capital markets department will be to strengthen our ability to help countries gain access to international capital markets. Only by getting access to investment capital from the rest of the world, private investment capital, will the IMF's poorest member countries be able to make a real breakthrough in poverty reduction. The IMF should therefore be ambitious to assist them in this process. And I'm ambitious in this. This is one of the reasons why the IMF should stay engaged with poor countries, because we would lose time if we would not stay engaged. In a globalized world, poverty is an issue that affects everyone, and the poor must be full participants in the process of international cooperation. It pays off for all of us. At the same time, it is clear that the IMF must remain focused on its mandate, promoting sound macroeconomic policies and domestic and international financial stability as a precondition for sustained growth. What is really needed to make this work is a good division of labor with other international organizations, especially the World Bank, to make sure that careful attention is paid to all issues that are crucial to growth and poverty reduction. We are engaged in this process, and I'm sure that the outcome will strengthen the effectiveness of both the fund and the World Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, 4 countries from the Americas, that is Bolivia, Guyana, Honduras, and Nicaragua, are benefiting from debt relief under the so-called Initiative for Heavily Indebted Poor Countries. And we are working very hard, the bank and the IMF, to make this initiative, not least for these 4 countries, a success. But the most important thing we can do to help fight poverty is to empower poor countries to help themselves. Crucial for this is increased access to markets in the industrial countries, in particular for products that matter the most to them, such as agricultural products, textiles, and other manufactured products. And here, no major industrial region, neither Europe, nor Japan, nor the United States, is free from sin. Last week's IMF meetings underscored the crucial role that a new round of multilateral trade negotiations can play in promoting growth and poverty reduction. In this region, NAFTA has demonstrated that opening markets can be a win-win proposition for all participants. And certainly, therefore, the establishment of a free trade area of the Americas makes a lot of sense. But in my view, this should not exclude sub-regional cooperation and integration. The expansion of international trade has been one of the channels through which globalization has contributed to unprecedented world prosperity in our lifetimes. Other channels have included technological innovation, especially in transportation, communications, and medicine, rising standards of education, the spread of democracy and free markets, and the growth of international capital markets. Of course, each of these phenomena poses both opportunities and risks. Indeed, 10 years after the end of the Cold War, and I come from a region which was closer to the famous Berlin Wall. Indeed, 10 years after the end of the Cold War, a plethora of new challenges is confronting us. And there is a vigorous debate about the advantages and disadvantages of globalization. In my view, the opportunities clearly outweigh the risks, and I would much rather face these challenges than the problems of the former Cold War. The task before us now is to strengthen national commitment and international cooperation to ensure that markets continue to expand, harness the benefits of technological change, and educate our citizens so that they can grasp the opportunities of a globalized world. The Americas are well placed to lead by example and to demonstrate how to secure a good future for all people in this hemisphere, but throughout the world. And the IMF looks forward to supporting them in this effort. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent speech. Thank you, Horst, for giving us not only your views on Latin America, but also your views on the world economy. We're now open for questions. Yes.
George Landau, past President of the Council. Mr. Kohler, one of the biggest cliffhangers in the region in IMF relations is Ecuador. What is your prognosis?
Well, my prognosis is that if the cooperation with the IMF is continuing on a productive basis, there will be a positive outcome.
Marty.
Martin Schubert, Euronav Finance Corporation. Mr. Kohler, how has the IMF changed its policies since the Russian debacle and the criticism that IMF policies often restrict growth? And the criticism that IMF policies often restrict growth of an economy?
Well, let me first say, if something goes wrong, the fund is the scapegoat. If something goes well, nobody talks about the fund. That's the way of life, and we shouldn't complain too much about that. But I want to be more serious. After the Asian crisis, Russian crisis, crisis in Brazil, I think it was time to draw some conclusions. And one conclusion is, for instance, that the fund should reduce its mission creep and concentrate on a focused objective. And this focused objective is indeed macroeconomic stability and growth. That is one of the major conclusions. And the second conclusion is that we need to work with the private sector on a market-friendly basis, because I do not think that there is any power in the world who can have the super regulation to shape everything, that everything goes well. We need to work with private sector people, with their creativity, give them some guidance because sometimes that is needed, but have this constructive, open climate of cooperation. And on this basis, I think we will play a better and stronger role to promote growth.
Thank you. I think maybe we have time, although we're over time because you all took a half an hour rather than 15 minutes at the break, but maybe we have time for one last question if it's a short one. Yes, David, but please make it a short one.
Short question. David Malpas with Bear Stearns. In the debate over fixed versus floating, so we now have quite a few currencies weakening against the U.S. dollar. So part of it is dollar strength, part currency weakness. Do you have comments on which way that debate is going, especially given Turkey's changeover from a fixed lira?
Well, it's clear that the risks for so-called soft pegs are made clear during the course of the last years. And therefore, the development goes more either floating systems or hard pegs. Both systems can work. Hard pegs worked in Hong Kong. I still believe it works in Argentina. The convertibility law is a reasonable law, and I'm really appreciative that Minister Cavallo unwaveringly said we are basing our policy on the existing convertibility law. The decisive point is the right policy. A floating exchange rate regime gives politicians, if you want so, more room for error. It has a higher tolerance for errors. A hard peg needs a very decisive policy in response of attacks. And that's the situation. I'm in favor more of floating exchange rate regimes, but I don't exclude hard pegs, currency boards, or other hard pegs. But I underline the importance of the right policies. It can work if the right policies are implemented. And with regard to Turkey, I think it was right what they did, moving to a float. It is right that they now defined a very market-friendly, open policy with regard to investors. It will pay off.
Thank you very much, Horst. Let's give him a hand because he's really opened his doors to all of us.
Good morning. I have the honor of introducing Francisco Gil Diaz, the finance minister of Mexico, and without a doubt, the most respected economist in Mexico. Francisco Gil Diaz, or Paco to his friends, returned to government service in December after turning Avantel into a force for competition in the Mexican telecommunications market. Paco has spent much of his career, over 20 years, at the central bank, where he was subgobernador before leaving to become CEO of Avantel. The first challenge as President Vicente Fox's finance minister was to reach a compromise with Congress, where the PAN does not hold the majority, and pass the 2001 public budget. He achieved that task, and Mexico has a solid, realistic budget that ensures that services are met for the population and economic targets achieved. In addition to the external risks posed by the U.S. economy, the Secretary's key challenge today is to negotiate a strong package of fiscal reforms. These reforms will put Mexico's economy on the right track of convergence with its NAFTA partners. In order for Mexico to provide its population with the services they deserve and still have the right balance in public finance, tax collection and compliance with tax laws must increase. Despite contention on the issue of VAT on food and medicine, the fiscal proposal is really to cut taxes while improving tax collection. Once implemented, the reforms will pave the path towards declining interest rates that will provide Mexico's private sector, especially small and mid-sized companies and home buyers, with a low-cost domestic financing market, similar to the U.S. and Canada. I'm sure Paco will discuss these reforms with us this morning, and we are very fortunate to have this opportunity to have him with us. Thank you.
I believe most of you, if not all, have a handout. You don't? Well, you will later. I think the copying machine broke down, so we have to rely on NAFTA and get some copying machines from Aguascalientes over here.
I think so.
Let me give you first a short comment on how the economy has been behaving in the past few months. The level of interest rates measured by the 28 CETES rate has fallen from a little over 19% at the beginning of the year to a little over 13% right now. That's a fast drop that was possible because of the way the central bank manages interest rates, which is to let them float completely without restrictions on the lower or upper side. And I think it was a smart move by the bank to continue with that policy and to achieve a lower expectation of inflation towards the next few months, and thereby have interest rates, together with a greater confidence on the Mexican economy, tumble in these first months of the year. We're also getting the effects of the slowdown in the U.S. Exports are considerably down. Even demand for energy, especially oil products in Mexico, production is down. There are plant closings, layoffs, and that has meant a considerable fall in especially Pemex's income. It's a fall of 41%, which is remarkable. It's really a drastic fall. But tax revenues are behaving well, and at the same time, the budget has stayed below the amounts that were authorized by Congress. So that has allowed us to achieve our budgetary target for the first 3 months. This is a very timely conference because we presented to Congress on Saturday the budgetary results for the first quarter, and we are down on the deficit slightly because we were able to keep expenditures below the fall in income, so that the budget deficit is actually somewhat lower than we had budgeted for. The Global Economic Activity Indicator, which is a good measure of GDP in Mexico, has been going down from a growth of 6.6% in October to 5.1 in November, 2.7 in December, 3.1 in January, but down to 0.1 in February. And I'm sure it's going to continue with that performance in the next few months until the U.S. economy picks up. Inflation has continued to decrease continuously. It is down to a 6.87 annual rate in April, and the first preliminary figures for May show that the trend is continuing. That is true both for the CPI and for core inflation. Exports were down 4.5% in February, but up 5.2% in March. So there is some recovery there, but at the same time, imports fell in February and grew in March. But the correction in both exports and imports, with a more than proportional one in imports, has meant that the trade deficit is about half of what analysts had been expecting. And that contributes to explain the strength of the peso. The peso has been revaluing in the past few months. It has revalued almost 7% from its high or low, whichever way you want to look at it, from its most depreciated level early in the year to about 9.29 pesos per dollar right now. Public revenues fell 3.4 billion pesos, but expenditures also fell, and that, as I explained, has brought the public balance down into the levels that we were expecting. That will mean that, as we announced on Saturday, we're going to cut expenditures in the future by an additional 3.4 billion pesos because of the reduction in revenues, and continue to reduce expenditures as long as we see revenues to continue weakening as we expect them to. But at the same time, we have revised our deficit figures for legal reasons, because Congress has not recognized IPAB debt as public debt, and for other reasons. We have not been showing the true amount or the total amount of government debt, and therefore not the true or total amount of public sector borrowing. So starting with this report on Saturday, we're making a publication of what we label public sector borrowing requirements. And the figure for year 2000 is 3.56%, 3.5% of GDP for year 2000. We are publishing the figure also for the first quarter, and we're going to continue publishing them. And we have released, and it's already on our website, historical data so that you can compare the trend, the evolution of public sector borrowing requirements on our website, because just publishing the number would certainly not allow for analysis if it was a single number. And starting next month, instead of doing it on a quarterly basis, we're going to start publishing public finance figures on a monthly basis so that the budget can be more closely followed by everybody, including, of course, the government. Well, this amount of debt and this level of borrowing mean that we have to improve the balance performance of the public sector budget. So we have presented, as Brian mentioned, a proposal to Congress to increase revenues. This proposal makes it much easier for small and medium-sized enterprises to come out of the informal sector into the formal sector. It provides a very simple mode of compliance. It includes a substantial reduction in income taxes and at the same time a leveling of the value-added rate to include many items that are now zero-rated or exempt. There has been a substantial amount of discussion around this proposal and some opposition, but I believe that it will come through, especially because governors are facing an even more difficult financial situation in Mexico and are, I'm pretty sure, working in a successful way with their own representatives and senators and among themselves to build an alternative proposal to the executives. But I think it is an alternative proposal from what I have heard and from what I have discussed with several governors already and with members of Congress of several parties. That is going to be very much in line with what we proposed, although of course there will be some important changes, but I think that the revenues that we are seeking from this reform are going to be there. We also sent an important reform following on the footsteps of Chile and Argentina, who in the past few years have consolidated their financial systems into solid one. I think they are exemplary and that have contributed to make their banking sector is extremely strong. And we have proposed to Congress and had the Congress accept a substantial reform to the banking and financial sector. We want the financial sector to become again a source of growth in Mexico, a financing of growth, and have introduced reforms that strengthen the securities market to guarantee minority shareholders' rights, to punish the abuse of privileged information and market manipulation, to allow new intermediaries to go into the market, and to introduce new securities for long-term financing. This act has already been approved by Mexican Congress. We also introduced a new mutual and investment funds law to introduce the figure of investment funds distributors to avoid conflicts of interest between investment funds and operating companies. This one has also been approved by Congress. Also, a credit institutions law and financial groups law to enhance corporate governance, to increase the rights of minority shareholders, to introduce independent board members, and to create an audit committee at the board level, to improve the framework for banking operations, to allow new technologies for the provision of bank services, to clarify requirements for mergers and acquisitions, and to set a new framework for related operations, to strengthen regulation and surveillance while reducing their cost, define responsibilities and activities of the different authorities, introduce prompt corrective actions based on banks' capitalization, to have preventive measures instead of corrective measures, and an organic law that creates the National Savings and Financial Services Bank, model on Desjardins in Canada, to provide savings and lending services to people that do not have access to traditional financial institutions and create a financial culture among low-income sectors. This one has also been approved by Congress, and an organic law that creates a Fannie Mae type of institution, the National Mortgage Institution, that has been approved by the lower house and will be approved by the upper house as soon as it opens again for the discussion. These reforms will strengthen the banking sector and will turn it into a driving force of Mexico's economic activity. We, in the light of the lower revenues and in the light especially of the slowdown in economic activity, will accelerate a supply-side oriented, that is a deregulatory stimulus package. It will include expenditure cuts in the same amount as our lower public revenues, and we shall not exceed the budget or borrowing ceiling established by Congress. And at the same time, even though some of these measures include changes related to the workings of development banks, we will not allow any expansion on the credit of development banks. They will have to expand credit only to the extent that the ceilings authorized at the beginning of the year allow them to. Congress did not discuss the fiscal or tax initiative in the past few weeks because the initiatives we sent included several laws in the financial sector. They included tax reforms that mean a new value-added tax law and a new income tax law. So it was quite a bite to digest in just 3 weeks. But there is a likelihood, I think a strong one, that there is going to be an extraordinary session of Congress in the next few weeks, and that we will have the discussion of the tax proposal there. There is a widespread recognition in Mexico about, by all parties, of the need to enhance government revenues and to control budgetary expenditures and to eliminate waste. We are working with Congress towards that, and we'll be able to show you, as we have been showing in the first few months of the year, results in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paco. The minister has agreed to take a couple of questions. May I open the floor? By the way, his presentation is now available in copies outside. The courier came fast from Aguascalientes, and we've got copies available for you outside. We're making copies now. They'll be available outside. Okay, good. Thank you. Yes, Arturo, please identify yourself.
Arturo Porcecansky with ABN AMRO. Mr. Minister, what is this idea that you're pondering about a new relationship with the IMF, possibly using the new facility?
I didn't mention it. It was Mr. Kohler who did. Well, the contingency credit line that the IMF has been working on is supposed to work in a reverse fashion. That is, not as a corrective, but as a preventive type of program. And since it involves a substantial amount of in an open line of credit, and at the same time the IMF recognizes the progress that has been made in Mexico in several areas, we're considering it seriously. We think it's a good idea of the IMF and that it would be a good idea to accept it. We're studying the proposal and will agree probably, if everything goes well, in the next few weeks with the IMF to accept the proposal they have made to us. But I think it's very important to put it in that framework. It's something that has been proposed to us and that we view with sympathy.
Mr. Minister, I would like to know, Beatriz Rangel from the Cisneros Group of Companies. I would like to ask you what contribution does trade between Central American countries and Mexico does to GDP, to the Mexican GDP, and whether you would be willing to entertain the idea of developing a strategy that would integrate these countries more into the Mexican economy in order to promote economic growth.
We're open to trade with everybody, and most especially with Central America. What we need to do is to improve the infrastructure in the south of Mexico, and to have Central America improve also its infrastructure. We have terrible difficulties with transportation between Central America and Mexico. We are so close geographically, but so far apart in transportation costs. I remember when Chile deregulated its transportation sector, some charts made at the World Bank, which relocated countries in the map according to transportation costs. At the time, we had not deregulated the transportation sector nor the seaports in Mexico. And Chile was actually closer to the U.S. than Mexico at the time in terms of transportation costs. And that explains very well the success, among other reasons, for Chile's export drive. So we have to work on that too, and part of the Puebla-Panama plan of President Fox addresses the issue.
Yes, David.
Mr. Minister, David Malpass with Bear Stearns. President Fox in his campaign talked about a very fast growth rate for Mexico, and I wanted to commend him on that and him for selecting you and all your good work and dedication over the years to making Mexico grow fast. And I wonder if you could describe, just in general terms, the vision over the next few years of how Mexico will be able to grow at a very fast rate. President Fox had mentioned 7% in his campaign process. Is that achievable, and how? Thanks.
I think it is, David, if we continue with the ambitious deregulation package that the President wants to push. He wants important progress in telecommunications deregulation. We also are working with the Economics Ministry towards deregulating everything related to creating new businesses and to operating them. Actually, one of the biggest parts of the finance reform or of the tax reform has to do with much lower paperwork and information requirements and in general procedural requirements to firms, especially medium and small, but also the big ones, and to go into e-trade, e-commerce between the taxpayer and the Treasury, so that we make it much easier to comply. That is, I think, the main thrust of the reforms, and these are not the only sectors that the President wants to push, along with electricity and gas. We are looking into ways to improve liberalize and strengthen the contracts for auto and self-generation of electricity. I think we're going to have good news in that regard very soon, and thereby incentivize a considerable amount of new investment, foreign and local. And looking as well with Congress, I think there is much more sympathy than people realize in Congress for a constitutional reform that will allow for dry gas exploration, extraction, and distribution in Mexico.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Pupo, Minister of Finance of Mexico. So that you recognize it when you see it outside, this is what the minister's presentation looks like. Thank you.
It is with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, Minister Domingo Cavallo. Minister Cavallo has an extensive and impressive career as a public servant in his home country, Argentina, a career that dates back almost 30 years ago. He started as the president of the Bank of the province of Córdoba back in 1972, and he was the president of Central Bank of Argentina in 1982. He also was appointed Deputy Secretary of the Interior back in 1981, and he became Deputy for the province of Córdoba in 1987. He served as his country's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 89 to 91, and from 91 to 96, he was the Minister of Economy of Argentina. Since then, he has been a very active member of the Argentinian Congress, representing the party Acción por la República in the province of Buenos Aires. His academic background is worth mentioning. Some highlights of his academic background, especially his achievements in the fields of economics. Mr. Cavallo has holds several degrees in economics, like a PhD degree from the Córdoba National University, a PhD degree from Harvard University in economics. He was awarded a doctor honoris causa in political science by the University of Bologna, Italy, and also a doctor honoris causa for the University of Paris. As we all know, Mr. Cavallo has been recently appointed the new Minister of Economy of Argentina, a challenge that is well known by him, as we gladly recall the remarkable positive achievements and results that his economic adjustments produced back in the early 90s. And precisely to talk about this challenge that we have Mr. Cavallo today, and please welcome and join me in welcoming Mr. Cavallo.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy of having been invited to address this 31st Washington Conference of the Council of the Americas. And I congratulate Bill Rhodes and all of the members of the Council for such an impressive meeting. I have to speak on the economic outlook for Argentina. Let me first say that President de la Rúa was elected in 1999 to transform our educational and health care system, our police and our court system, and to improve the standard of living of the poor in Argentina. That was his mandate. He went through 15 months of very difficult political events because the economic depression that Argentina has been suffering since the mid-98 did not allow him to concentrate in delivering these commitments with the Argentinian people. The economic crisis became the center of attention of Argentinians, and particularly when it transformed itself into a financial crisis that you know are very fast in developing and very difficult to counteract or to solve. Of course, that prevented the work of the government towards the goals that had promised during the campaign. So, after 15 months of difficulties, President de la Rúa decided that he had to broaden the support for his government. He was able to preserve the support of the alliance, which is a coalition of the Radical Party and the Frepaso, to bring into the government my own party, also to get the support of most provincial parties, and to establish a very good relation and working together with the governors, most of which belong to the Peronist party. So 40 or 50 days ago, President de la Rúa was able to rebuild the basis for his government, the support for his government, and now we are working in Argentina with a spirit of national unity, and his government is very close to be a national unity government. That is what Argentina needed, and that is what Argentina is trying to build. A national unity government for what? We have now a very clear goal, a very clear target in terms of economic policies. We want to achieve 6% annual growth on a sustainable basis for the next decade, or even more than the next decade. We know that that is perfectly possible. That was achieved by Chile during 15 years, and it was achieved by Argentina during 7 years, between 91 and the first semester of 98. Actually, it was not 6% annually, it was 5% or 5.2%, because we did suffer a deep recession, but a short one, during 95, when investors thought that Argentina would devalue and they were wrong, that Argentina would default, and they were wrong, that the Argentinian financial system would collapse, and they were wrong. But, you know, those wrong expectations on Argentina generated a recession, but we were able to take Argentina out from that recession in a very short period of time. In spite of that phenomena, that external shock that affected us, we had more than 5% annual growth on a period of 7 consecutive years. Now, how will we achieve this fast growth, sustainable growth? Or, to begin with, how will we reactivate the economy that is now in depression? Our focus will be in competitiveness, in recovering competitiveness. The same way as our focus was in preserving currency convertibility during the 90s. When I say that we will recover competitiveness, textbook economists say, aha, he will devalue. Because in the textbook case, the only way to recover competitiveness for an economy is to devalue. But that is in the textbooks, but not in history. We have our own history, which teaches us, first of all, we were able to have several decades of currency convertibility, of currency stability, and increasing competitiveness at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. We had the convertibility system based upon gold in those years, and we became a very competitive nation. Competitiveness increased all the time during those years, and they were decades, and we remember that very well. But in the last decade, during the 90s, we were able to combine currency convertibility and a strong peg to the dollar with increasing competitiveness during 7-8 consecutive years. During the 80s, our export had just increased from $10 billion to $12 billion from 1980 to 1990, in spite of wild devaluations and a very undervalued currency in Argentina. Between 1990 and 1997, we went from $12 billion exports to $27 billion exports, in spite of our strong peg, in spite of our currency convertibility system. Why did we become more competitive during this period? Because we increased productivity in Argentina, the same way as we had increased productivity during several decades at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, how do you get increasing productivity in an economy? No doubt, through investment. Because it is investment for the long run in human capital, education, healthcare, improving the standard of living of the families, that matters. In the shorter run or the medium run, it is investment, the investment that is necessary to bring improved management and to implement more advanced but available technologies into the production process. So it is investment the key to increase productivity. But of course, efficient investment. How do you get efficient investment? By creating the climate favorable to investors to detect opportunities, to implement them, and of course to get financing for them, and then to produce the outcome, which will be increased production of goods and services of better quality, that is growth, which will come from the investment itself, plus the increasing productivity that is associated with investment. Now, why are we in a depression in Argentina? And I emphasize, depression is not a long recession. It is really a depression that started in mid-98 and that is still there in my country. Why did we go into a depression? The first reason was increasing cost for new investment and increasing uncertainty on the rules of the game for investing in Argentina. Due to political mistakes, during 97, 98, and 99, the government authorized the provincial governors to increase spending. At the same time, reversed some key reforms in the labor markets and in other areas that had been deregulated. And as the economic minister was fiscally responsible, he decided that the best way to finance those expansions and to counteract for those reversals in deregulation was to increase taxes. But he increased the wrong taxes. He increased, in general, to increase taxes is not good. But if you increase the taxes that will prevent investment and efficient production, then you make a big mistake. What taxes were increased? Custom duties on capital goods, on importation of capital goods, from 0 to 14. Value added on capital goods. Then a minimum income tax that is a tax on assets, a tax that you pay even if you make losses. And therefore, when you start investing, you make losses, you have to pay this income tax or minimum income tax. A tax on indebtedness. You borrow, you pay interest. In addition to paying interest, you pay an additional tax. So everything went in the direction of increasing the cost of capital goods, increasing the cost of financing capital goods, increasing the cost of investment. That, together with the reversals of the process of deregulation, particularly in connection with labor markets, but also in other areas that had been deregulated, like the introduction, for example, of an antitrust law that obliged any global company wanting to purchase some assets in Argentina to go through a 6-month process of paperwork and things like that. That law was approved in 98 or 99. So all those changes provoked a sharp decline, a continuous decline in the investment rate of Argentina, which the decline that the statistics show underestimates the problem. Because if you deflate that decline in the investment rate by the increasing cost of capital goods, in real terms, the decline of the investment rate was much bigger than what the statistics show. And with this decline in the investment rate, there was no more productivity increase in Argentina. You know, productivity had been increasing 4 to 5% per annum between 91 and 96, and 97. But if you look at 98, 99, the year 2000 until now, productivity has been declining. Increasing productivity has been actually negative. And that is the natural outcome of reducing investment. Probably the investment during the last year was not enough to replace the old capital. So that was the main source of the depression in which we went into Argentina. In addition, we had unfavorable external shocks. Of course, the devaluation of almost every currency against the dollar, and therefore against the peso, provoked a deflationary impact into Argentina. Not only the devaluation of the real, the depreciation of the euro, but look around and look and compare the evolution of any currency, any floating currency in the world, the Canadian dollar, the Australian dollar, the Singaporean dollar, whatever currency you look around, you see that all those currencies behaved like the euro, or, they depreciated vis-a-vis the dollar. So the strong dollar, because that is particularly the phenomena, if all the currencies are weakening, actually what happens is that the dollar is very strong, that the strong dollar impacted Argentina through a phenomena which we could call importation of a deflation, when you have a currency pegged to the dollar. It is exactly the opposite phenomena that, for example, the Singaporeans suffered in the 60s and 70s, when they had a peg like ours to the sterling and then to the dollar. In those years, they imported inflation from the sterling and from the dollar, because the sterling first and the dollar then became weak currencies. And that is why the authorities of Singapore at that time first shifted their peg from the sterling to the dollar, and then finally let their currency to float, but not to depreciate, but to appreciate, because they were able to conduct a monetary policy in Singapore that would deliver less inflation than in the countries that had first offered their currencies as patron for the Singaporean currency. I brought this picture just to say that when you have a strong peg or a currency system like ours, you may be importing a deflation when the patron currency is very strong, or you may be importing an inflation when that currency weakens and depreciates. And we have been suffering that problem. And the third problem is that a wrong interpretation of our monetary system, which some people like to identify with full dollarization of our economy, prevented the central bank to conduct the kind of monetary policy, limited, but anyway, some degree of monetary policy that could have helped to soften the impact of this deflation. On the contrary, there was a monetary policy that was contractionary, because the central bank during this 3-year period sold most of its stocks of treasury bills and governmental bonds, and by selling that stock was absorbing liquidity all the time. So the combination of these three phenomena sent Argentina into a depression, a phenomena like the one that you suffered here in the United States, those that are North American, during the 30s. So we have to take Argentina out from this situation. And we cannot devalue, and we will not devalue, and we will not abandon our currency system, because the currency system that we have is loved by Argentinians. But it's loved not because they love the dollar. It's loved because it protects their property rights on their savings, on their salaries, and particularly because our currency system offers Argentinians freedom to choose the currency. And they know that if they feel secure with the dollar, they save in dollar. If they feel secure with the euro, they can save in euro. If they feel secure with the peso, they can save in pesos. That is what Argentinians love. Because Argentinians know that by having this particular monetary system, it is impossible for any governor of the central bank, it is impossible for any economy minister, it is impossible for any president to produce a monetary surprise. it would be not only illegal, but it would be impossible in practice, because Argentinians are fast enough to change their currency holdings from the currency that is suspected to be devalued to the currencies that they feel it protects their savings and their portfolios. That is why nobody in Argentina speaks of devaluation or monetary surprises. It is only abroad that some people still think that Argentina can devalue. A devaluation would be a disaster, a political disaster, because the government that allows a devaluation would be violating a key law, which is the convertibility law, which is based upon our constitution that gives Congress the power to create a monetary system. But it would create a lot of balance sheet problems all across the economy, and it will provoke tremendous complications into the Argentinian economy. We Argentinians know that very well, but there are some people abroad that still think that we can let the currency to float, to start with a sharp devaluation like it happened in Brazil. That is wrong. The Brazilians could do it because the Brazilian people did not have the alternative of saving in dollars. But Argentinian people has the alternative of saving in dollars, and there is a lot of savings in dollars and debt in dollars, not only for the banks and of the government, but of all the families and all the small and medium-sized companies in Argentina. And Argentinians like that system of having freedom to choose the currency for their contracts. And they will not allow any government to remove that system. So, letting the currency to float, to start with a sharp devaluation like it happened in Brazil, is something that cannot happen in Argentina. So those that expect that phenomena to happen will be wrong, for sure. Now, on the other side, there is the people that advocate dollarization. They say it's a perfecting or an improvement of our currency system. It's the full convertibility. That's not true. That's not true. Because convertibility is a system to create an Argentinian currency that could become a regional currency and someday could be integrated into a larger currency area through negotiations, of course, but a currency of our country. And we use the dollar to reassure Argentinians that that currency will be of high quality and that will not introduce into the economy inflationary expectations. But those that advocate dollarization, particularly in Argentina, and some people abroad, actually had in mind a different idea. Those that advocate dollarization, of many of those that advocate full dollarization, they say, start with a devaluation, 20% or 30% devaluation. After devaluing, in order to prevent this explosion of inflationary expectation, then go into a dollarization. That way, you would have reduced 20 or 30% government spending in dollars, 20 or 30% wages in dollars, 20 or 30% prices of non-tradables in dollars. And those people are the same that say, of course, that should be accompanied with a default on the debt and the imposition of a 20, 30% debt reduction on holders of foreign bonds. You know, everything is association. It's not 1D, it's not dollarization. It's 3 Ds. Devaluation, dollarization, and default, or debt reduction that they are advocating. We Argentinians will not impose a debt reduction on the assets of Argentinians and will not impose a debt reduction on the assets of foreigners. Because the basis for the transformation that took place in Argentina during the 90s is respect for property rights of Argentinians and property rights of foreigners. That is why we assure Argentinians and we assure the world that we will not go through these crazy monetary alchemias that some people are suggesting, because that would be to destroy the basis for the institutional transformation that took place in Argentina during the 90s. That is organizing the economy on the same basis as our political life is being organized. Rule of law, respect for property rights of nationals, of residents, of the Argentinian people and of the foreign people that wants to deal with Argentina. That is the basis of our policies. Now, how we will then recover competitiveness? Of course, we will recover competitiveness preserving convertibility, currency convertibility, improving our currency convertibility system, and for that we have submitted a draft legislation to Congress that has already received approval in the House of Representatives. I know that most image advisors and people that understand how the markets behave in the United States keep telling me, don't speak of the euro. I have to speak of the euro. Let me explain why. Because we are introducing the euro in a basket the day the euro will be equal to the dollar and will be equal to the peso. Exactly that day, because that day we will be able to improve our currency system without producing any monetary surprise. And why we will improve our currency system? Because in the future, after that day, our currency will be a strong peg, but to a more stable currency. That is the average of the dollar and the euro. Of course, sometimes our currency will be weaker than the dollar, if the euro is weaker than the dollar, or stronger than the dollar, if the euro is stronger than the dollar. But our currency will be just in between, and it will be more stable to the dollar than the euro, and more stable to the euro than the dollar, and will serve Argentinian financial and commercial relations with all the world, much better than our current system. First of all, the dollar and the euro do not convey inflationary expectations, and therefore they are very good currencies in terms of reassuring Argentinians and the world that our own currency will not be an inflationary currency. Secondly, we have trade and financial connections with the dollar area and with the euro area. So we better have a currency which is stable to the average of the two, and not stable, very stable just to one of them, and very unstable to the other. That is why we have introduced this. No doubt is a significant improvement in our monetary system, and it is not at all a modification of the essence and the principles of currency convertibility. Of course, it will give Argentinians more freedom to choose currencies. They will have the peso, which will be different from the dollar and different from the euro and the dollar. And I think Argentina will use more and more the peso, you will see, because they will realize that is the currency that fits better to their everyday needs and to their futures. Okay, but is that all? No. For sure, this modification of the currency system will only prevent importing deflations or importing inflations in the future, but it will not cure the problem that we have now in terms of reduced competitiveness. So we have to work now in increasing competitiveness, in removing the problem of reduced competitiveness. And for that, we have been eliminating taxes and removing regulations. Which taxes and which regulations? We are eliminating the taxes that increased in the past, in the last 4 years, the cost of investment, and the taxes that increased the cost of production. And we are removing the regulations that had the same effect of closing investment opportunities, of creating uncertainties that would prevent investment. All those regulations we are removing. So we are creating the best possible climate for investment to increase significantly in Argentina. In a context of market rules for all the economy. So if we do more reforms, they will be all market-oriented, all freer trade, all in the direction of putting pressures on investors to be very efficient when they invest, and those that operate companies to be very efficient in producing. That is increasing productivity. That will be the outcome. Of course, you may get investment and increase in productivity and growth if you have demand. Foreign demand, there exists. We did not increase our export more simply because our cost of production were too high. So if we reduce the cost of production, we will have plenty of room for expanding our exports. Secondly, domestic demand. Investment itself is a component of domestic demand, but consumers' demand has to increase. And what does determine the consumers' demands? The sentiment, the feeling of Argentinians. If they feel secure on their future, if they see that Argentina is starting to solve its problem, they will consume more. Otherwise, they will save, and they will not invest those savings in Argentina, but they will take their savings abroad. So that is exactly what we have to do, to create the condition for an expanding demand and for reactivation of the economy. Of course, this requires working in Argentina with Argentinians, and that is why I try to speak to Argentinians and work in Argentina as much as I could during the last 40 days. Unfortunately, plenty of comments abroad that now this is a different Cavallo that does not want to speak to the markets, that, you know, it became crazy, now it's a protectionist and things like that. That's not true. I am the same Cavallo, the same person that worked during the 90s. I have the same ideas, and I want to create confidence in Argentina, first of all, by Argentinians. And I hope to be able to work together with President de la Rúa, with Foreign Minister Edwardo Rodriguez Javarini, and all the cabinet, and not only de la Rúa's government, but the provincial government that belong to different political parties, to recreate confidence in Argentina. But let me say or send one message. Argentina will defend the property rights of Argentinians, but will not attack the property rights of those that invested in Argentina. And that is the message I want to convey to you today. Thank you.
The minister has kindly agreed to take some questions, and please identify yourself and your affiliation when you pose your question.
Minister, Sebastián Correa, IBM Latin America. Some weeks ago, in order to improve Argentine competitiveness, the Argentine government reduced capital goods import duties. Originally, it was included a reduction to zero of the information technology tariff, but it was changed because of Mercosur dynamics. I would like to know how are you considering to face this? I mean, in order to improve Argentine competitiveness, if you can think about changing the IT tariffs, because nowadays it's very expensive, the access to technology for Argentine enterprises.
Yes, you are right. We made a mistake because I didn't know that for Mercosur, information technology was not a capital good. I had not been in touch with the negotiators during the last 4 years. So I went to Brazil. I told the Brazilians, we want to reduce import duties on capital goods down to zero. They accepted, and they were very supportive. They offered us a waiver for that. But then when we came and we implemented, we discovered that information technology was not within the category of capital goods in the nomenclature of Mercosur. So we had to reverse our decision to bring that to zero. But I am happy to inform to you that the Brazilians have the same approach that we have to create better possibilities for improving investment and productivity growth. And we are working together to change the common external tariff to include a zero tariff for information technology, or at least to produce a significant reduction in the import duties for information technologies. Because Brazilians, like Argentinians, we know that it would make no sense to prevent our young people, our young entrepreneurs and our businessmen in general to pay more than what they should pay in order to implement the more promising technologies in terms of increasing productivity. So I think Mercosur will fairly soon have very low tariffs, or probably zero tariff also for information technology products.
Martin Schubert, European Inter-American Finance Corporation. Firstly, Minister Cavallo, let me commend you for twice having the courage to jump back into the fire at a critical time. You make many of us feel 10 years younger. Friday, as you probably know, during that conference call that you gave, many of the investment houses were disappointed that you didn't say more about the $20 billion swap transaction, where some details have come out this morning. Could you explain a bit more about what the status of it is and how much you intend to do and what you expect the results to be?
You know, I am surprised that people listening to me last Friday expected something different from what I said. Because, you know, I see what the lawyers say to me on how restrictive we should be in commenting on future offerings and things like that. I received very clear instruction of what I should not say in order not to violate particularly the laws of this country. And at that time, we had not yet agreed upon on the group of banks that would manage the offering. And of course, we cannot give details until they are registered and the same information offered to everybody. But I had said the previous Sunday here in Washington at the time of the interim committee that we will work for reducing the size of our debt services in the next 4 or 5 years through a market-friendly, voluntary exchange that we will offer. And I could not give more detail then, and I will not give more detail today. First, because I do not know the details. Believe me, I am not a specialist in financing or things like that. We do have people that specialize in that. That is the Secretary of Finance, and he is the Deputy Economic Minister, Daniel Marx, and his team. He is giving all the details, and he will be much more specific. And for the time being, what I am saying is exactly what the lawyers told me to say in order not to violate the laws of the markets.
We have one question here to the right.
Antonio Herrera, Venab-Chem, Caracas. Mr. Minister, you spoke about enhancing competitivity and investor confidence. As we have heard this morning, U.S. Congress willing, Chile will enter a free trade agreement with the United States very shortly. How do you see that as a possibility for Argentina, given Argentina's track record of being at the forefront on bilateral issues?
Okay. We have a commitment with Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay in Mercosur. That commitment includes a common external tariff, which I personally consider that is not the best instrument that we should have in Mercosur, but is there. And we have also a commitment not to engage in bilateral negotiations, except if Mercosur as a whole decides to engage in bilateral negotiations. That has been signed by Argentina. So, if you ask Adalberto Rodriguez Javarini, he will say, we will comply with our commitment because we want to comply with our commitments. Now, I admire the Brazilians. I admire President Fernando Henrique Cardoso. I admire Pedro Malanga. I admire Celso Laffer. I admire Minister Tapia. I admire Arminio Fraga. I think they are strong and very good leaders. And I am sure that if there were no campaigns in the horizon and things like that, that would completely agree with me that it is not reasonable for Brazil, for Argentina, for Uruguay, and for Paraguay to just forget about the possibility of speeding up the process of worldwide integration through this bilateral negotiations procedure. So, in spite of the fact that, of course, diplomatic negotiations normally took place in secret, as I think that the best way to convince the people is by talking to the people, and that means speaking openly, I explained that I think Brazilians, Argentinians, Uruguayans, Paraguayans, probably together, if we were able to do it, should take advantage of these possibilities of having bilateral negotiation, like Chile is having not only with the United States, it had before with Canada and with Mexico, and it's having also with the European Union. And I completely agree with what Mr. Serlich said. The best way to work for freer trade worldwide is to create, in a sense, competition for implementing freer trade. So, of course, if we can have again a multilateral negotiation like the one that Ambassador Hills and me and others were very involved in the early 90s, the better. But meanwhile, if we can make progress by working on hemispheric integration, we should devote our efforts. But if there is a speedier way, a faster way, to use these bilateral negotiations, always in the direction of creating more free trade, we should not leave that possibility aside. So, what will happen, I don't know. Argentina will meet its commitments with all our friends, but I personally, and most Argentinians, and I think many Brazilians, will not persevere in making mistakes if we can be right in using other alternatives. No?
I'm afraid we don't have time for more questions. Mr. Cavallo, once again, thanks for your kind remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, a short word, a couple of administrative announcements before we break. First of all, to let you know that you can leave bags and briefcases and things here in the room. You don't have to take it up to the lunch. Second, you cannot take them up to the lunch, sorry. Then 2 p.m. is the return time here. I want to stress that the President will be arriving for his remarks at 2:30. For security reasons, the room will be secured at 2 o'clock.